When we put on theater, there's at least a little bit of ritual and certainly magic that can occur both on stage and in the audience.
Welcome to Witch Hunt, the podcast exploring the historical and contemporary significance of witch trials and their far reaching impact on our world. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack. On today's episode, we welcome back a special guest who's helping us understand how centuries-old witch trial narratives continue to shape our cultural consciousness in profound and sometimes problematic ways.
Professor Jane Barnette joins us from the University of Kansas, where she's directing an innovative production of John Proctor's The Villain by Kimberly Bellflower, a play that reexamines Arthur Miller's The Crucible through the lens of the Me Too movement and feminist consciousness.
Jane's production explores how the Salem witch trials have been reinterpreted and sometimes misappropriated throughout history, challenging us to reconsider what we think we know about historical witchcraft accusations and their modern parallels.
What makes this conversation particularly timely is that Jane's University production premieres just days before the play opens on Broadway, creating a unique moment to explore how theater can transform our understanding of historical narratives.
In our discussion, we'll examine how Miller's fictional recreation of historical figures like John Proctor and Abigail Williams has shaped public perception of the Salem witch trials, often obscuring the historical reality of the actual victims.
We'll also explore how the term witch hunt itself has been weaponized in contemporary discourse and how theatrical reinterpretation can help reclaim silenced voices from history.
So join us for a fascinating conversation about theater, history, power dynamics, and the transformative potential of confronting difficult narratives from our past.
To be clear, we're primarily discussing Arthur Miller's fictional character of John Proctor rather than the real person John Proctor who was hanged for supposed witchcraft. So when we say John Proctor is a villain, we mean the fictional John Proctor, not the authentic witch trial victim.
Welcome back to Witch Hunt Podcast, Jane Barnette. It's so wonderful to have you back. What have you been up to since you were here?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be back. And yeah, I've been pretty busy. I've been directing a play at the university where I work, the University of Kansas.
Can you remind us and our audience about your expertise and passion and how it relates to your current project?
Absolutely. So I'm an adaptation dramaturg, which sounds very specialized and in some ways is. But that just basically means that I work behind the scenes with a lot of live theater productions, especially ones that are adapted from literature or any other source for the stage. And so my first book is about adaptation dramaturgy, but my second book, which came out last year, is about witch characters on stages and screens, in particular ones that are adaptations. So it's sort of in my wheelhouse, but the way that I overlap with y'all is obviously my focus on witches and witchcraft. So yeah, this play is also somewhat in that wheelhouse, although quite different from the plays that I talk about in my book.
And what is bringing about this project now?
Oh gosh. So the play is called John Proctor is the Villain. And the play is set in 2018, right at the height of the Me Too movement. And arguably, right now is a time that some of the same kind of themes are reemerging that we saw in popular culture and certainly in politics in 2018, 2019, 2020. And those are the key years when I started really, or when I completed the research for the book that I wrote and published last year, Witch Fulfillment. So it's deja vu all over again. But this particular play, yeah, it's a newer play. And so it's an opportunity not only for the students at the University of Kansas to get to do a newer play, but because it's engaging with the Me Too movement and because it is a play about female rage in many ways, it is a really important and useful outlet for the student actors and frankly for me.
So there's multiple versions of John Proctor in people's minds. There's basically the man, the myth, the legend.
Mm.
Which John Proctor are we discussing today?
That's such a good question. Because, of course, yes, we have the John Proctor who was hanged for the crime of witchcraft. And obviously, that's an important one to reference in this podcast. But this is really a play that engages with the John Proctor character that's in Arthur Miller's 1953 The Crucible play. So and famously, Arthur Miller took the 60-year-old man who was in Salem and was executed, the actual figure, the factual figure, and made him about 35 years old in The Crucible. And potentially more importantly, but also relevant if nothing else, he took the character of Abigail Williams, based on an actual factual human who was 11 years old in the reality, and made her 16 years old to sort of make it better. But still, it's an affair between a 16-year-old and a 35-year-old in Miller's play. By today's standards, I would say it's still problematic, just of a different degree than an 11-year-old and a 60-year-old that we don't even have any real evidence that they had an affair. These are different characters. So when I say John Proctor is the villain, or rather the title of the play says that, the playwright, Kimberly Bellflower, is really responding to Arthur Miller's play and the way that arguably, right, Arthur Miller's play has become shorthand for how people encounter and or know about the Salem witch trials. But there's so much misinformation that's in that fictional account. So yeah, I'm just so grateful for podcasts like y'all's because you help to bring some of that real information to the public.
In what ways do we find John Proctor villainous?
So let me just start by saying spoiler alert, because the play unfolds in a way that's not exactly a mystery, but it works best when there are surprises. And the play is set in a high school classroom, so honors lit junior year, and they're going to read The Crucible. And so there's this very charismatic, very beloved male teacher, Mr. Smith, and we have several students who are 16, 17 years old in the classroom. And what we discover is that we've got sort of a meta theatrical thing happening, right? We've got an opportunity within the classroom that's on stage to stage parts of The Crucible as a project, a hypothetical project for these students in this hypothetical classroom. As they are doing it and researching The Crucible, they're discovering some of the same things I just mentioned. They're discovering the license that Arthur Miller took in doing this fictional account, and especially the young feminists, because there's also this feminist club that some of the girls in the classroom have started. And they basically are starting to recognize that these changes that Arthur Miller made might have been really helpful for him as he was going through his own dissolvement of his marriage. But now it's created a narrative that is problematic, especially as things in their small town, it's set in a small town, things in their small town start to come to light because of the attention that the Me Too movement has put on believing women and trying to really unearth stories of sexual assault and sexual harassment that have been occurring without necessarily people believing the women who are telling about it. And so John Proctor is the villain because one of the things that we surmise from this play, and frankly, there's a lot of research that supports this possible interpretation, is that the reason that these young girls in Salem were having fits and that they seemed to be acting so askew potentially was that they were having PTSD, not only because there was so much violence during that time, which was obviously also true, but potentially because the men in the town were not respecting any kind of notion of consent. And so there could have been all sorts of sexual assaults that was occurring. And potentially this may have been a way that the young women/girls were just trying to get attention to themselves and trying to have a voice. And so in that regard, if we see it that way, then especially the fictional John Proctor becomes the villain here because 16 is, it's below the age of consent. And so even if some 35-year-old, and that's about the age, by the way, of the teacher in this classroom, a 35-year-old wants to have an affair with a 16-year-old, we would consider that within the realm of Me Too.
Thank you for that explanation and for introducing us to the play. How is your production different than the ways that this play has been staged before?
Oh, it's actually really exciting. And I will say, I talked to the playwright when we were in early conversations about staging it at KU. And I say that because I'm going to tell you some kind of radical things that we're doing, but we did talk to the playwright and she was very much on board. And the most exciting thing is that we're going to close our play on March 13th, and on March 20th, it opens on Broadway. Not our play, but a professional version of this play. So it's really exciting to have this kind of freedom and to work on it on a college campus where we can do things that a lot of professional theaters can't. So that being said, the big change is that I have double cast the play. So there are two teacher roles, and those roles are static. So those actors are the same in both casts, but I basically doubled the number of actors to play the student characters. And what that allows me to do is that on the nights that are focused on one cast, the other cast serves as other students in the classroom. So it helps to fill out the classroom and to create a more realistic classroom setting. And it just creates the atmosphere better. And then on the other nights, it goes the opposite way. So it's not a double cast insofar as there's nights off for half of the cast or almost half of the cast. There's still very much an ensemble, but what that has created, which is really exciting, is that with 2 actors per student role, it's been remarkable how much they've been able to talk to each other as actors about choices that they're making for their characters. And we have some pretty different choices, but they're all grounded in the text and they're all making a lot of sense for the characters. So it's really beautiful as a director to see just the shape that it takes when one cast is sort of playing the so-called leads versus the other cast playing the so-called leads.
I can't imagine like how exciting that must be for you, but also the students with the timing of this. How
Yes.
incredibly special.
Yeah. We've talked about that. I mean, I'm a dramaturg by trade, so of course I'm going to ask these big questions of why this play now. But I also have a dramaturg working with me who has been talking to the student actors about this. But it has been, especially in recent weeks, right? I mean, it's hard. These students, many of them, I mean, I would say, a very diverse cast, and many of them are in minoritarian kinds of positions, right? So whether non-binary, I've got a trans actor, I've got actors of color, and in all sorts of different ways, these students have been feeling the effects of recent decision making in our United States government that have made them feel less than human, that have made them feel like they are in grave danger. And so being able to come to rehearsal and not only put that out of their mind for a moment, but in a fictional world, get to exact a certain kind of revenge has been really, really fulfilling.
Yeah, and that speaks to so much to a lot of what the play's underlying undertones are is
Yeah.
about power dynamics
Mhm.
and how people relate to each other, who's got the power.
Yeah, absolutely. I would call it a feminist dark comedy because there's just no question that this is a play that is meant to reclaim the voices of women who have been silenced, whether we think of that from the perspective of the young women, juniors in high school who are female identifying, who find that they're not getting the kind of respect or voice that they see the male counterparts getting, or if we're talking about the actual characters in Miller's play, and more to the point, frankly, and I know y'all appreciate this, the actual people on whom those characters are based. I can't stop thinking about I mean, I might start crying because I think about the 11-year-old Abigail Williams and what it must have taken for her to just be in the position she was in. And I don't know, how does a person survive? So yeah, it's those power dynamics are very much an undercurrent in this play.
Would you like to tell us about some of the characters in the play?
Oh, would I? uh, I think the ones I'm most drawn to, I'm drawn to all of them, but I personally, I know for a fact that if I were acting in college, I would have been cast as Beth. This is not a surprise to anybody who's read the play. Beth is basically a nerdy student who's nervous and very into school. And yeah, basically, it's me to a T and much less worldly than the other students in the class. And that was me growing up. When I was in high school, I wanted to know more about things outside of my small town, but I was also very focused on doing really well in my high school. And that's the same as Beth, and she just wants the teacher to approve of her, and so they have a really tight relationship, which is, on the one hand, really beautiful. But then there's another character who is Shelby, and Shelby is not present on stage when we first meet all the other characters, all the other students. And we don't know why she's gone, but we start to discover why when she comes back. And she's a fascinating character and really beautifully written by Kimberly Bellflower. It's clear the care that she has taken with this character and with all of the characters, but especially as we come to discover Shelby has been through more than anybody should have to go through at the tender age of 16, including the fact that she has had instances of adult men taking advantage of her sexually. And so she's incredibly resilient, but she's also really wounded. And to see young actors really work with a character that has this kind of three-dimensionality and respect for the survivorship of having lived through that kind of experience, I mean, it's really a gift, but it's also it is a play that all of the emotions happen. There's lots of laughter, but then there's also probably tears.
In what ways does the Crucible intersect and relate with the students' experiences in their own small town?
So I teach at the University of Kansas, which is in Lawrence, but most of our students come from rural, small towns. So early in the rehearsal process, there's a reference in the play that talks about it being a one a stoplight town. And I've never lived in a small town like that, but I would say more than half of my student actors have. So they were really sharing what it's like and how true it is, the sort of saying that everybody knows everybody's business. They were explaining that that's actually definitely a thing. And the notion of everybody going to the same church or that you would go to church in the first place, like all of that is assumed and part of how many of these student actors actually grew up. Beyond that, there's at least one and probably more, unfortunately, actors who have experienced things that are similar to what Shelby goes through and what we discover about Shelby. I had actually 2 nights ago, one of the actors said to me, "It always means a lot to me as an actor to do a show." She said, "But at this particular role in this particular play hits so close to home that it feels like a kind of exorcism every time I'm up there." Because, the play ends in this dance that is maybe my favorite part of the whole thing. It's what kinda drew me to it. I just I love the song that it's, choreographed to. It's "Green Light" by Lorde, but I also just think it's so powerful. We, frankly, too often have plays that are just talking or plays that are just musicals, but I like it when we start to kinda have a little bit of each, and having that dance kinda gives it a little bit more of a musical flavor. It's not a musical, but a little bit more like that. But yeah, that dance feels like a certain kind of exorcism for that particular actor. Um, and I don't know for sure, but I can sense it just based on the way that they respond that there are other actors who have a lot of familiarity with these characters as well.
not only because these are deep human experiences, the human experience element is so evident, and then it's such a recent piece, and then we're still in the midst of so much of this. So I can imagine that describing it as an exorcism really answers, I mean, it really speaks. I
Mhm.
mean, that is a really good way to express it, I think.
Yeah, Sarah, I see what you're sort of struggling with, and I want to tell you, I feel that, right? Like as a director, there are moments where I get so emotional because I'm seeing something happening in front of me that I'm so frustrated that can't happen on a much larger level, right? And I mean, that's the beauty of art. It's the beauty of theater and other kinds of art that we can kind of create small worlds where we can dream about different outcomes. But ideally, we do that as rehearsal for the real world. And right now, it's just such a I don't know about y'all, but I just feel so powerless. And it's quite a moment to be someone who writes about, thinks about, researches witch hunts and witchcraft because, it's been at these moments of history where we have seen both an upsurgence in terms of people who are practicing witchcraft and unfortunately also a backlash against it. And I feel it coming.
This really makes me wonder too about the term witch hunt. Does
Mm.
this production address that?
Yeah, it does. It addresses the part of witch hunts that are historically accurate, sort of, insofar as the high school teacher in this fictional world does at least talk about the people who were executed and that there were false accusations. And at least there is acknowledgement of that. But very quickly, I would say most of the play really shows us in stark relief what this other use of witch hunt is, right? Like as it has been used since Arthur Miller with the allegorical kind of idea of trying to keep somebody subversive quiet. And of course, it's been misused by people who are actually people who have a whole lot of power, but they're getting nervous because somebody has called them out on something and they're going to use the phrase witch hunt to distract us from what they actually did. Um, so it's a complicated phrase, it's a complicated allegory. But hopefully y'all probably feel me on this. It can be so darn offensive when it is used in ways that are meant to support the status quo and people who have historically been very anti-witch. So yeah, a play that not only has the phrase in the text and deals with it sort of in the most literal way, like on stage talking about it, but then almost all of the action that unfolds after that is resoundingly about the concept of a witch hunt as an allegory.
I definitely see how in an age when we have basically three kinds of witch hunts or uses that I can see of the term witch hunt. It's the literal accusation of witchcraft against somebody and persecution because of that. There is that allegorical uh, witch hunt of the vulnerable and powerless being trampled on by the powerful,
Mm.
um, just to maintain the status quo of you've spoken about. And then there's these powerful people abusing the term. And that really frustrates me so much. But I can see in the play how empowering it is
Mm.
because the characters do get to speak their truth.
Yes, and I think what the play handles so delicately and yet insightfully is that question of belief, right? So it's one thing to finally speak one's truth, but it never feels resolved if there's mostly disbelief happening, if there's so much doubt created. And historically speaking, the ways that we have marginalized women who have spoken out against being mistreated by men or anybody has been to call them crazy, has been to call them a slut, has been to, suggest that they are evil. And all of those allegations come up and are even kind of tried on, if you will, by one of the characters whose father. So we have a character named Ivy in the play who is one of the 16, 17-year-old girls in this group. And she has a father she comes from a wealthy family, a really well known, prominent sort of person in this small town. And her father gets accused of some kind of sexual misconduct. And at one point, she is basically taking up this position of, well, we have to have trials, and if we can believe the people who have made these accusations, she says, and if they are proven to be true, then we should really punish those men. But if not, we should really punish those women at least as much. And that thinking, I certainly understand, like, if there's a false allegation, that's, I guess, one thing. But, you know, what is the benefit of going out on a limb, especially at the age 16 or 17, and trying to falsely accuse somebody who is much more powerful than you? Most of the time when people are talking about this false allegation kind of stuff, it is that third case that you're talking about where it's actually a powerful person trying to not to deflect what is the accountability coming for them.
What strategies do the men you had mentioned that one of the characters' fathers gets accused. What
Mm.
strategies do these men who get accused use to silence the accusers?
Yeah, we see one character more fully enacted who is been accused of something. And so we see a little bit more with that character. But in the case of Ivy's father, we hear it through Ivy's recounting that, it's a typical thing, especially from someone who has wealth, that he's managed to find this young woman another position in another nearby town. And so basically, he's gotten her out of his orbit so that he doesn't have to worry about her allegations having too much effect. But the primary way that we hear about it is that mainly the character of the accuser keeps getting called into question. The character of, the good name of, which is, of course, a central theme in Arthur Miller's play in terms of, if you want to think of John Proctor as a hero, then you have to really hold a certain kind of value on the notion of not only the status quo, but more importantly, the reputation, the good name that hinges on, in the case of both the Crucible and John Proctor as the villain, it hinges on a world where somehow we can blame a child for seducing an adult. And that's for me just a hard stop. It's very frustrating. And we're in a time period right now, arguably, where there have been more and more sort of pushes for traditional values, especially for women. And certainly in terms of after Roe v. Wade was overturned, we've seen more and more calls for, why aren't young women having more babies? And why aren't young women, settling? And to me, that's a similar kind of rhetoric, right? Because it's a rhetoric that wants to establish, before really adulthood, try to sort of capture a young woman slash girl into a marriage kind of contract that keeps her from necessarily becoming a full adult first. And we see that in the play from the character Raylin, because Raylin has been dating the same person in this play for 7 years, and she's only, like, 17 years old. So it's like from 10 to 17, she's been dating, or maybe it's 9 to 16, but the point being, for 7 years, half of her life, she's been dating the same boy/young slash young man. And that is not uncommon in small towns, especially when the sort of central guiding moral compass is an evangelical kind of Christian perspective. It's that notion of, oh, yeah, well, you should just stay with one person. And that way you can save yourself till marriage. And that way you can have just one partner your whole life. But often these standards are different for men than they are for women. And most of the time, they're applied to much younger women than the men in question. And I feel like that's where a lot of the truth of this play kind of comes into full relief. And one of the things that Bellflower does so eloquently is show us that arc with Raylin, because at first, so many questions that she's asking, she almost ends every line in "I don't know, I don't know." She keeps saying, "I don't know, I don't know." But I feel like a lot of young women can relate to that. There's a stage of your life where you're like, "Who am I?" And you really can't necessarily make that make sense in your hometown. You almost have to move out or at least get older and learn more before you can truly start to decide what it is you want to be and what you want to do. By the end of the play, there's this beautiful monologue that Raylin gives as part of her final project with Shelby. And in that monologue, she basically has this vision of a world where women can say their truth and they're believed. And that's very powerful to see.
What is that going to take?
Ooh, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm gonna get I'm gonna get crunk on you here, but I think we have to get rid of capitalism. There, I said it. How about it? I mean, I really think that Sylvia Federici, one of her books is behind me, so you're probably familiar. Caliban and the Witch, women, witches, witch hunts. She writes about the early moments of the European witch craze and talks about the need for enclosure that led to capitalism. So the desire to own land in the first place, which is such an anti-witch concept. What person owns land? That's so weird. But of course, capitalism relies on the notion of who is a landowner and who is not a landowner. And Federici really connects the beginning of capitalism to the singling out of women who resisted it as witches. And to be clear, I want to acknowledge that I know that there are actual witches out there, right? But in the history, this has been part of the way that subversive individuals, not just women, but anybody who pushed back against the power that was trying to seize land, for example, that was a really successful way of keeping them out of power and seizing their land. And that's certainly a compelling argument for what happened in Salem, right? Between the village and the town. And I'm sure you're duly aware of all of that history, but I think what it will take, and that's why it's so scary, because like, that's a big thing, but I think it takes a post-capitalist world. Like, we have to think about who are we and what do we really want? Is money and capital and land the be all end all, or might there just be something else?
One of the things that you mentioned about tying young ladies down before they've started their lives, I just think that was really meaningful.
Mhm.
And one of the human advocacy things that are really getting attention right now is making child marriage illegal, addressing a lot of places are working hard to address that. And then I'm thinking about these lives that don't start, but and thinking about the characters in your play realizing things. What if there was a sequel
Mm.
for some of these characters? Is some is any one of those girls going to come out of there with their life changed because of what's happening in that classroom?
I mean, I think Ray that's part of why I love Raylan so much in terms of that arc. I think Raylan does change, and that we actually it's beautiful. We get to see it in that last scene. And so, yes, I think after that, Raylan really embraces feminism, and I think she goes on to college and really embraces knowledge, and who knows what she becomes. Maybe she's a lawyer, maybe she's a who knows? But whatever it is that she ends up doing in the world, I bet she's trying to make the world a better place for people like Shelby, her best friend. And Shelby is irrevocably changed. And she even has a moment where she's talking to Raylene, and Raylene says something like, I know the answer's probably no, but are you okay? And Shelby answers by saying, yeah, no, I'm definitely not okay, and I won't be for a long time. But she at least recognizes that maybe with counseling and maybe with certain steps that she can take to regain her sense of self, that there might be a different path forward. And to me, that dance and that performance that ends the play, because again, they're in this high school classroom that's been assigned to read the play and to do an interpretive project. And maybe it's me as a teacher myself thinking, oh, isn't it great that maybe in a classroom setting, especially one that deals with drama or theater, that maybe by enacting these roles, there could be a certain kind of release or realization that occurs. And I really hope that's true. I feel like it is true. I've seen it happen in my students. And I feel like in that classroom, what else is happening is that Mason, who's one of the boy characters, and at first we see him as someone who's just like failing all of his classes, doesn't really care. He's just there as some kind of like class clown. By the end of it, he's saying things like, I really like smart girls. And he's starting to pick up on some of the things from the feminism club. And I think, she has Mason stand up and start doing some of the dance at the end. And he's the only boy who does that, or young man. And I feel like he changes as well because of this club, because of what he has seen, because of how he starts to recognize that his best friend Lee is maybe not such a good guy after all. Um, so yeah, I really do think, believe that art has the ability to transform, especially when it is something that's like a brokenness that people have. It has that, catharsis or exorcism possibility. And frankly, I think it's a little bit like witchcraft. Like there's a little magic there. I do think that when you put on theater, I mean, historically, this is true in terms of like the ancient Greeks, right? Like they did theater as a form of worship for Dionysus, right? And before that, even. I think that even today, even in 2025, when we put on theater, there's at least a little bit of ritual and certainly magic that can occur both on stage and in the audience. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but sometimes when you're watching a play, like you just feel like all of your goosebumps happen and you just sort of, you just feel different sometimes.
I think it's so important you pointed out that transformative power the play has on the audience as well as the characters within it and the cast and crew that's putting it on.
Mm.
Everybody who experiences this play, I think there's that opportunity for a transformation.
Yeah, I hope so. And, it's funny, I just got back from speaking at a university women's club, which has university women in it, but also a lot of emeriti professors. So, of a certain age, right? And so their interest in this play was remarkable. And I think what a cool audience if we can have audiences that are not just sort of the same generation, the Gen Z, where this play is kind of in many ways written in the language of and for Gen Z folk. But I also think it has the potential to be very transformative for older women. And I'm hoping to see, people of all ages and certainly men in the audiences well, because it has the potential to really start some important conversations.
How do people attend one of your nights? Or I'm assuming it's at night, but I guess it could
Yeah.
be anytime.
Yeah, we have one matinee, but yeah, everything else is at night. So the play runs the March 7th through the 13th. So it's 6 performances only, but they can go to kutheater.com and they'll see John Proctor's The Villain as one of the performances that's listed there. We are also working to make some of the dress rehearsals available because with the double cast, a lot of people have expressed interest in trying to see 2 nights, one of each cast, which is great, but it's, kind of a limited audience. So we're trying to sort of open it up, make sure that as many people that want to see it can see it. So yeah, it's going to be really special to share this with the audiences.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you and for the audiences. It sounds like, this is a unique production of the play, and also the timing is so thrilling. That's right before the Broadway play
Yeah,
starring Sadie Sink
I know.
begins. So, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah,
Yeah, that has been really fun. And of course, the actors are both thrilled and terrified that they get to kind of build up to this Broadway thing. In fact, one of them has already gotten a ticket for a preview night in New York. And they were telling me, they were like, I don't even know how I'm getting there, but somehow I will get there.
that's great.
Yeah.
I
So
love it.
exciting. Is there anything else about this experience or this story that you want to be sure to touch on?
Yeah, I don't, and this will come as a surprise, so I'll just give y'all a heads up because I forgot to mention this, but this is something that might be at least useful to share. Um, on the 12th through the 13th of March, or maybe it's the 11th through the 12th, but certainly on the 12th, we have a special guest who's coming in from Pennsylvania. She's a colleague in the field, so she is also a theater historian, a dramaturg, but her name is Bess Rowan, and her work is she's currently writing a book about mean girls and depictions of also of teenage rage on stage. And there have been a lot of really cool plays that have come out in recent years and also on screens where we get a chance to kind of see how that teenage stage of coming into womanhood can really ignite some interesting kinds of relationships. And so she's coming to give a pre-show talk on the 12th, and she'll be in town to see one night of what we call the town cast and one night of what we're calling the village cast.
Oh,
Um,
cool. I
so
see what you
really
did
excited.
there.
Thank you. I was like, I
Yeah,
don't think I even have to explain this to them.
No, that's fun.
Yeah,
that's fun.
yeah, yeah. So that's going to be a really neat thing. Anytime we have people come in to do pre-show talks, I think it really just sort of heightens the engagement that our especially university audience can have with the piece. But in this case, Bess is just, I mean, such a lovely human. I'm very excited for her to have a chance to interact with our students. So,
Mm.
This is really like one of those once in a lifetime moments
yeah.
for this group.
Yeah. Well, and I can't wait to write about it because I have been talking to my assistant director, and maybe there's just a million people out there doing double casts and we've never heard of it, but it's a fairly unusual thing to do. And just every night having rehearsal with, it's kind of weird having two casts. And so you'll block the scene with one cast, and then it's like, okay, let's get the townies up here. Okay, let's work with the village people. It is a very different way of directing. I can't put it into words yet. I'm still sort of noodling on it, but I definitely want to write about it. I feel like there's something
Yeah.
there to say. Yeah.
So great. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Mary Bingham has a new Minute with Mary.
Jane referred to some of the accusers in 1692 as experiencing what is known today as PTSD. Based on a statement given by Samuel Sibley on March 25th, 1692, one could surmise this could have been true for Mary Warren, John Proctor's 20-year-old servant. In a conversation with Sibley, Proctor said he was going to fetch his Jade home and beat her. Proctor also revealed that he previously threatened to beat Mary if she had fits and kept her close to her wheel, meaning probably her spinning wheel, and that would have kept her occupied. Living under the constant threat of beatings would have been traumatic enough for Mary. Also, both of her parents were already deceased, leaving her without a grounded support system and little chance of becoming a formidable suitor for someone, leaving her with almost no chance to better her social status.
Thank you, Mary.
And now Sarah has End Witch Hunts news.
Historical injustices mirror ongoing witchcraft accusation persecution worldwide. Our mission to end witch hunts rightly connects colonial American victims to those suffering from witchcraft accusations today. By breaking the silence around these cases, we forge a path toward justice for all victims, past and present. Our campaign for colonial witch trial exonerations continues to gain momentum following Connecticut's landmark 2023 passage of H.J. 34, a resolution concerning certain witchcraft convictions in colonial Connecticut. This success is now followed by similar legislative efforts across former colonies, with two critical initiatives currently needing public support and community advocacy. Massachusetts HD 3054, an act exonerating certain individuals accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts, seeks historic justice for 8 pre-Salem victims, including 5 who were executed in Boston. Maryland's HJ2, exonerating those accused, tried, or convicted of witchcraft in the province of Maryland prior to the American Revolution, aims to address their colonial era witch trial convictions. Both bills are currently in committee and will require community advocacy of public testimony for advancement. These victims can no longer speak to their own innocence. We can do that. You can do that. These efforts build on decades of progress, from the initial Massachusetts 1957 Act to the recent Elizabeth Johnson Jr. exoneration in 2022 and the 2023 passage of absolution in Connecticut. However, many colonial witch trial victims remain without recognition or justice. The current initiatives acknowledge that witch hunts extended beyond Salem, affecting innocent men, women, and children across multiple colonies. Your voice is crucial. There are 2 important petitions for you to sign now. Please sign to support Massachusetts at change.org/witch trials. And also, please sign to support Maryland at change.org/MD witch trials. Whether you're a descendant or a concerned citizen, you can support these bills by emailing words of support to the legislators voting, submitting written testimony of support, or speaking in support at the approaching committee hearings. Connecticut's successful testimonies provide an excellent template for effective advocacy. This work connects directly to our mission of ending witch hunts globally, recognizing that historical injustices mirror ongoing persecution. Join us in breaking the silence and securing long overdue justice for these victims. For guidance on submitting testimony or getting involved, visit our website or reference Connecticut's public testimony records from HJ 34. Links are in the show notes.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on Witch Hunt.
You should check out our robust catalog of expert discussions.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.